Recently, and by recently, I mean like 8 months ago, I had never had an experience before this. I moved to an island in the South Pacific and have gotten the hiking bug, so I try to get out to a few locations as much as I possibly can. This happened about 2 weeks ago. Since I live in the South Pacific region, it gets mighty hot, driving all by the most insane hikers indoors unless it's at night. Of course, I'm not a masochist, so I try to do all my hiking in the early hours of the morning, or in the evening when it starts getting cool. I've never been afraid of hiking myself. I did it when I lived in Oregon and never ran into any problems with it. But my island isn't my friendly home state. I always carry pepper spray, and when I used to go hiking in Montana and Wyoming, would sometimes carry a handgun to ward off anything I couldn't take on, whether it was a bear or a person, but I had always gotten off considerably lucky. I got to the trailhead at about 6:30 in the evening. The trail was called 1,000 Steps, but in all honesty, it was mostly just a walk straight down the cliff and then a grueling journey back up. I didn't want to go, but my dog, Mad Moxie, needed to be walked, and I had done the hike so many times I could probably do it in my sleep. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up was an old, rickety, rusted-out blue pickup truck with a big plastic tarp over the bed to keep the rain out. These are pretty common on the island, affectionately earning them the name Guam Bombs. I didn't think much of it as I hooked up Moxie and started heading down the trail, trying my best to ignore the mosquitoes that were making a meal out of my exposed neck. Heading down the trail was relatively easy, avoiding the banana spider webs. I felt the stress of my day slowly unwinding as the underbrush grew darker and the night approached. I made it all the way down to the water's edge when I noticed a man standing about 100 yards away. It was dark enough now that I could only see his silhouette, so I have no idea if he was looking at me or at the water, but I chose to ignore him and instead pulled Moxie's ball from the backpack and throw it for her a few times to get all her wiggles out. After some time, the man started walking over to me and stopped maybe about 10 feet away. Now, I'm not a tiny waif of a woman. I'm 23 years old and I stand about 5'6", and this guy was just a couple inches taller than me. But most of the locals were on the smaller side. But something about him just felt weird. "Evening," I greeted as he nodded and looked down at Moxie, who had just returned from running after her ball. I stooped down to pet her, now humidity-soaked head as the man kept his eyes trained on my dog. "Can I help you, sir?" "Pretty dog," he responded mildly. "You alone?" "I have my dog," I said lamely, trying to sound braver than I was feeling. "I'm never alone." I tried to emphasize on the fact that I had my dog with me, but the man seemed unfazed by my statement. "Oh, have a good night." With that, he turned around and started walking back towards the trailhead. I watched his shadow disappear into the trees and waited for about half an hour before I started walking back towards the path, my mind on high alert as Moxie pulled me through the trees up the cliff. The crickets pierced the night as I climbed the steps, illuminated by my flashlight. My hands were full with Moxie's leash and my light, but you could bet your buns that I would have my pepper spray out. Finally, my light pierced the trees at the top and I practically booked it up the hill. When I got to the top, I nearly shat myself. The rusted blue pickup truck was sitting in the parking lot still, but their passenger side door was practically touching my car's driver's side. Inside the car, I could faintly see 2 men sitting in the cab, and I could feel them watching me. I slowly approached my car, walking as far over to the passenger side as I could, and kept Moxie with me as close as I opened the door and crawled over to the driver's side. At that moment, the door of the pickup truck flew open and my dog started going apeshit, barking at the 2 people who were now outside of their car and trying to break into mine. Heart in my chest, I rammed the keys into the ignition and tore out of the parking lot so quickly, I nearly took my mirror off. I called my mom as soon as I got home and she begged me to call the police. Unfortunately, the police here on the island aren't as vigilant as they are on the mainland, and that area is known for car thefts, muggings, and other debaucheries. As I learned from my coworkers later that week, earlier this month, another girl actually disappeared from that area without a trace, and it makes me wonder if the men in the blue pickup truck didn't have something to do with it. If I hadn't had Moxie with me, would I have been mugged or worse? If I learned anything from this experience, it's that for my lady hikers, please always take pepper spray with you. Go hiking in groups and always let someone know where you're going. It might save your life one day. And to the men in that pickup truck, let's never meet again. Didn't realize I had this story until I came across pictures of the event. This happened a few years ago, and I'm sorry for so much background detail, but I swear it's needed. I live in a small city, which is notoriously known for its use of drugs and illegal drum and bass raves, due to how remote and isolated it is. Usually, they don't end up badly, but there is usually a report every week about someone being stabbed or killed. Growing up in a rural part of the country, I found myself usually with nothing to do. All that surrounds me is fields, pigs, and more fields. So the best any teenage girl can do is an occasional campout on a field with her friends or maybe roaming the various abandoned farmhouses. Except every summer, there's a 3-day festival that has had its name changed 3 times due to the scabby reputation it has. My family is slightly torn apart. My dad lives abroad as an expatriate, and me and my mom only moved here for my education, but that's another story. Basically, we weren't very familiar with the area we lived because we lived in the Middle East for so long, and my parents are originally from London/Surrey area, so we never knew how bad this festival could be. I spent one day there from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. And within this time I experienced more use of drugs, violence, and outright sex than my entire, at the time, 15 years of life. But the one experience that stuck out to me was in the drum and bass tent, which, as I referred to earlier, was filled with the usual illegal ravers, except legally. Second-hand high from the weed smoke and slightly tipsy from alcohol, I discovered my love for the rave scene, until I got parted with from my friends. I was bobbing back and forth to the music when a guy snaked his hands around my waist and put his fingers in my belt loops. This surprised me, but it didn't register for a few seconds due to the smog that was in my brain. I pulled back and asked what he was doing. He was a tall, black guy. We'll call him original. Around 6'6" or 6'7", mid-20s to early 30s, and he told me that he'd seen me and thought I had an amazing body, and that he wanted me to come back to his tent with him. And what was my number, how old I was, and where I lived. I was wearing jeans, a high-cut shirt, a windbreaker, and sneakers. My body was not being shown off, by any means. I laughed. I'm not very good with confrontation unless I have my friends around me, and usually resort to being a bit timid and nice in the hopes of people leave me alone. Bearing in mind, too, that I'm a Caucasian female, 5'6" and maybe 125 pounds. I told him I was only 15, and I was fine and I wanted to keep dancing. He slicked his tongue against his teeth and stared at me with his eyes slightly laughing. I don't know how else to explain that, and I backed away and kept dancing. Stupid of me, I know. He came back up behind me, pulling my coat up a bit and putting his hands on my bum, where I immediately turned around and told him to get off me. He backed away and told me that he just wanted to get to know me better and take me away somewhere private. I told him that wasn't going to happen and just to fuck off. The humor behind his eyes wasn't present anymore. Instead, they turned cold and nasty, and I'll never forget that. Fast forward maybe 10 minutes. Another extremely tall black dude came up to me to talk to me while I was taking a breather at the back of the tent, who was saying I caught his friend's eye. They all thought I was gorgeous and wanted me to come with them to smoke, pointing towards a large group of black guys surrounding and patting Original on the back. I told him that I was with my friends and I didn't want to do that because they'd be angry if I left them. He told me they'd never have to know and put his hands around my waist, really tight, taking me toward the group. Again, I pulled back and told him that I didn't want to do that, and he looked at the group and shrugged. This happened twice more with different things said and offered to me, and the group getting angry each time I blew them off. I just ignored this, not wanting to cause a scene, feeling kind of what the fuck at the entire situation, and went back to the throne of the crowd, where the entire group formed a circle around me, bumping against me and pushing Original toward me. He cupped my face with his hands and loud whispered, the kind where you're drunk and loud in environment but the only one to hear them. All the things he wanted to do with me, that I could be his young, tight vanilla to his dark chocolate, and he'd destroy me, but I'd love it. My friend actually appeared at this moment. Seeing my face completely contort in absolute terror, she told him that I was a lesbian and not interested, dragging me away and back towards the toilets away from them. They were shouting how I was just a fuck anyway, and all he wanted was a bit of meat. You think the story ends here, but 3 hours later, me and the friend saw Original being dragged out of the tent by 4 security guards, being held by his hands and feet, and put behind a big door that was for drug searches. Like a scene from a movie, I saw the doors close as the guy was held down and security pinged some white gloves onto his hands. We found out later that guy had literally grams of angel dust and rats of little baggies hidden up there. I mean, I don't know what he was definitely going to do with that, but something definitely tells me I would have if I'd gone with him. Big black guy who wouldn't leave me the fuck alone. Let's not meet again. On October of 2016, a longtime family friend began harassing my family. So I've known this guy since I was around 5. He worked at my dad's car dealership as the person who basically maintenances the exteriors, washes the cars, shines them, etc. My parents became fond of him because he looked very sweet, and they rather felt pity for him as he had horrible hygiene habits. They'd often buy him food, gift him clothes, and things of that sort. Around 2015, this man gets a job right across the street from my mom's job. He saw my mom one morning and they just waved at each other. This man starts calling my mom frequently. Now, my mom is extremely nice. Too nice. So instead of just not picking up, she would talk to him. This guy becomes obsessed with my mom to the point she tells him to stop contacting her. Around May of 2016, all is well, and guy stops contacting mom. Months later, he began to watch my mom. He would park his car in front of my mom's job and watch her. She noticed him, but she never saw it as a huge threat, so she never said anything. That's where things escalate. My mom was walking out of work with a coworker one day. Normal coworker friendship. My mom catches a ride with her coworker to a mandatory work event, so she wouldn't have to drive home too late, as these events end late at night. Meanwhile, the guy is watching them walk to his car. He suddenly thinks that my mom is having an affair with the guy and decides to follow them. They arrive at the place, and my mom stays in the car while her coworker goes inside to check if this is the right location. The stalker walks up to the car, opens the door, and grabs a knife from his car and slashes the coworker's tires. My mom is in complete shock and immediately calls her coworker to come outside. The coworker decides to not press any charges against him, even though he easily could, as there were cameras outside the location. Now, my mom mentions none of this to my dad because my dad is really explosive, to the point that he will get in trouble for this guy. So everything is okay for a couple of days, until this guy starts calling my mom non-stop and leaving her threatening voicemails. The voicemail says things along the lines of, "If you don't meet up with me at the hotel on Wednesday at 1 p.m., I'm going to tell your husband you're cheating on him." This scares my mom because my dad has a past with domestic violence, so she's scared my dad will believe him and beat her. Wednesday comes along, and when she gets to work, he is outside watching her. The whole day, watching her. She calls my grandparents. They're not old farts, as my grandpa is ex-military, ex-judoka, and is no one to play with. They immediately drive to my mom's job, but this guy starts harassing my grandparents and won't leave my mom's job. 1 p.m. comes around and my mom calls the police. Dude hauls across the street and hides, leaving his car at my mom's job. Police search for him everywhere and he's nowhere to be found. The phone calls continue and things escalate. This man decides to vandalize my mom's car. He throws tar all over my mom's car while the car is parked outside my house. The car is destroyed and my parents have to pay lots of money to be able to fix it. At this point, my dad knows of the whole ordeal and is set on killing this guy. We advise him to calm down because my mom is planning on getting a restraining order from him, and she didn't want my dad to ruin her chances or commit a crime. He continues calling and stands beside my mom's job every day. This man starts driving by my house every day as well, and begins to see me as a target. He leaves my mom a threatening voicemail saying he is going to vandalize my car, so at this point I'm getting even more terrified. At this point in the story, my mom has had to call the cops on him several times, but the cops say they can't do anything as he hasn't physically attacked her. My mom decides she's going to finally petition for a restraining order. With the police reports and voicemails as proof, they set up a court date and give my mom a temporary restraining order until the court date, so approximately 2 weeks. This guy does not stop calling my mom, so my mom calls the detective in charge of her case, and the guy hasn't even been served with the restraining order yet. A few days before the court date. He was not notified with the court date, though, so he tells my mom he has proof that she won't stop calling him. He then starts targeting the rest of us. I wake up one Saturday morning, and my car has letters drawn all over the windows with nail polish. Luckily, we were able to just scrape it off gently, but by now I'm a nervous wreck. I start doing bad in my classes and I haven't slept for months. He then begins to harass my dad with voicemails and phone calls, but luckily my dad didn't buy any of his bullshit. Finally, the court date arrives. This man shows up with his stepson, and his stepson starts talking shit to my mom, because of course he only knows this man's side of the story. The judge calls them in and does the usual questioning, talks about the police reports, etc. The judge asks him if he has anything to say or show. He says, yes, I have a phone bill that shows she's called me more than 200 times in the past month. The judge says, okay, show me. Guess what? He didn't bring it. There's no such thing. Judge nods her head and says, okay, I've reached the verdict. He was found guilty, and my mom was awarded with a restraining order for life. We finally have peace in our family again. So, family stalker, fuck you, and let's not meet again.